Welcome here to our webinar. Greetings to our lovely audience. Good you made it here tonight. It's a premiere actually tonight. As you see here on the next slide, we have here tonight our first MEDVANCE webinar with a really nice fancy topic about on the market access topic. Tonight we want to talk with our guest Stefan Walzer and Entela Xoxi about the joint HTA approaches in Europe and the questions if we have to fear it or it's actually a chance for some of us or for all of us or for Europe. Okay, but before we start, let me tell you something about MEDVANCE first. So MEDVANCE is a European economic group of national market access consulting agencies. And these are for France, Next Step, and for Italy, Intexo, and for Spain, Oblique, and also for Germany, and you probably know us, Mars, the Market Access and Pricing Strategy GmbH. And we cover all the topics in Europe inside the European Union, many countries here, also Belgium, Netherlands, Austria, Switzerland, Portugal, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland, and also our good friends from the UK, from Remap, which are not longer part of the EU. We're still working with them, of course. And for us, it's still Europe, right? The UK. So also our good friends from Remap, we want to welcome here tonight. Yeah, what actually MEDVANCE offers is a lot of topics here in the market access areas, and also when you need public affairs. So we do all the advisory boards and the clinical engagement and the HTA evaluation. If you need that, or in the health policy or policy development, you see all here our repertoire or the services we can offer to you if you need it. Just go on our website, which is www.medvance.eu, and then here you can have all the contact details. Okay, and when we go further, now let's go to our webinar. So it's an active webinar, so feel free to ask questions. You can use either the chat function here in Zoom or the question and answer function, which is turned on, and just raise there your question written. After the presentation, which takes about 20 minutes, we have plenty time to answer your questions, and also we have a little surprise for you. And the first question, as always, slides will be provided afterwards, and the video will be published on our website. Okay, and of course, we have another little bit fancy topic now of Mars, which is a proud member of MEDVANCE. We now also developed the first and only market access podcast, and there we have actually already 2 episodes out. Now the second one, we have elections here in Germany, which already have or will have, we will see that a big impact on the healthcare system. You saw that in the news, so you don't want to miss that part of our podcast. And now let's introduce our guests tonight. First, ladies first, we have Entela Xoxi here, a former member of IFA. Good evening to Italy.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you.
Yeah. Entela is a scientific advisor at Intexo, a good friend of us, and she worked already in the field of HTA for the European Union. So we will have a good insights with her. And good evening to Weil am Rhein, to Germany, Stefan.
Good evening, Lutz. Good evening, Entela. Great to see you. Great to hear you as well. And always looking forward to the first MEDVANCE webinar, even though that, as Lutz, you said it, we've already run a couple of those Mars webinars now since the last year. So let's just see what we can rock also on a European level altogether.
Wonderful, wonderful. And for those who don't know Stefan Walzer, he's the CEO of Mars. He worked for a long, long time at Roche, and now he's running the Mars consulting agency here for almost like 10 years, right? So a long road we did together. So yeah, let's start tonight. So you know all the Professor Zweifel from Zurich, the former health economist professor here, great person. If you listen to hear us, welcome here. And Professor Zweifel said once in the discussion, you know the Treaty of Lisbon. You know what is written there? Healthcare is a national field. So with a joint HTA, Entela and Stefan, what do we have actually to expect?
Yeah, I think this is a very good introduction. And just to add here, right, Professor Zweifel is Swiss. So I think that was also what he added. I think when we've also first had a probably kind of discussion as well before the ISPOR in Barcelona at that time, long time ago, you might remember, with thousands of participants in one big kind of, let's say, room where we had that event as well in person. Now we're back to the virtual one. But yes, let's just see, because ultimately that I think is also the idea, just for my kind of short introduction, to very briefly, let's say, bring everybody a bit on the same page in a way. Where did basically join HTA start? Where are we now? And then I think the bigger discussion, what I think should also happen tonight, is then also with our surprise, but obviously first of all with our great guest Entela from Intexo, what could this really have as an impact on the various countries? And I think there might be obviously probably not so much black and white answers, but it's probably more different kind of options which we might come out there and see there. So ultimately, to very simply start with, all right, I think the whole kind of joint HTA has already started quite some and many years ago with the Unita network. I guess most of you might know that already. I would generally say it has, if I would be positive, I would say it was basically moderately successful. I personally would see it maybe even a bit more pessimistic. I don't see really a lot of movements, or which has at least been gone through in those years. I think at the end of the day, if you really see, the definitions are great, and I think this is maybe a good kind of academic exercise at the end of the day, but there weren't really so many assessments and cases really which were assessed through that kind of network. But ultimately, we just need to see if this was really just the ultimate start, because we potentially also might want to remember what is also just written here in the very first part in here, with respect to the European Medicines Agency, the EMA, that also this one was starting more on a country level. Nobody could really think that we could basically have a joint regulatory process many years ago, and now the EMA is reality since really, what is it now, 20 years or so, which I think also works from my perspective, and I'm coming from the market access reimbursement part, but I would say from that latter part that it works, I think, quite nicely. So let's just see. I think we had a very quick kind of discussion beforehand as well. Obviously, there was the proposal where I think we also had that ISPOR discussion. I think where also you have been on the board for discussion for such a kind of EU-wide binding cooperation in terms of health technology assessment. I think we have also gone a bit further in the meantime. I think there was not only a proposal, I think there were hard negotiations, especially also from the various country sides. We know it, for example, from Germany, that especially the payer side was a bit, let's call it, worried that maybe when we would come to such a joint HTA assessment, that the let's say the standards, what we know from the AMNOG process, might maybe be even a bit weakened, especially after obviously also Brexit was then decided on. So that was a big discussion, especially from the German, let's say, side. But I know that also, for example, we have our good friend from France as well in the line. So we're happy to hear as well how the whole discussions went in France. But what I have seen, let's say, out of Germany into France, that there were similar kind of discussions there, even though that we have had also discussions, especially with kind of smaller countries, some from Scandinavia, but also from Eastern Europe within the European Union, where they were really looking forward to that kind of process, which I think is an interesting kind of potential next steps. How would it potentially now really look like, right? And I mean, as we said, I think it will start. I think the first ones will also start first in oncology. Then I think that the second phase then is, I think, in orphan drugs. And then there's a third phase before probably also further, or let's say all of the disease areas. Plus, I think my understanding was also that medical devices would then also be added in there, would follow later on. So there will be a kind of time frame where also various kind of, let's say, indications are maybe a bit further, let's say, differentiated. And I personally found it quite interesting that the whole kind of assessment will start with oncology, because obviously we know, and Lutz, you might remember the first days within the AMNOG process, there were quite a lot of discussions whether oncology should be even a kind of exemption from AMNOG, the same as with orphan drugs, right? Because it is so special, as everybody was saying, right? I mean, people are dying, overall survival is important, all of those different things. So looking forward how this would really look like. At the end of the day, here's just an example, right? You see on the left-hand side, the German kind of bodies. It's, as we just said, the idea was just really having a look on the country side, but obviously we could also add in there the various institutions from Italy, for example, the IFA in terms of HTA authorities, but obviously as well other authorities from Spain, France, or other countries as well. I think the important part here is probably really that the whole kind of, let's say, assessment is probably then also really being divided in the overall European, let's say, approval with national validity. That's, I think, the ultimate idea, obviously, very much similar to what we see from a regulatory perspective. But then I think, for me, it's still, I think, a bit of the kind of question mark, how then the next step would really look like, which is the second part of it, right? Where we could probably still have the early dialogues and the preparation, obviously, of the evidence assessment for the country-specific analysis, because that is, I think, still what is as well, or which has been as well agreed on now in the last couple of months, that also the countries will have their rights, obviously, on the ultimate added benefit, but also, which I think is more important than the national pricing. And there, I think we might still see potentially some movements, especially now in the various countries, because this might as well give more kind of freedom how this would be probably handled in the different countries. I think also this one is probably the core kind of difference when you would potentially compare that to the EMA process, right? EMA is really the benefit itself, the benefit of the product, the risk-benefit profile, obviously. And here we're not only speaking about whether a product is really delivering what it should deliver based on the evidence, it's also, and especially then finally the money, right? And that is also Lutz's nice introduction, where I think Professor Zweif as well just said, the healthcare budget is still the responsibility of the various countries. And that is where, let's just see how this could really have an impact on. And I think, Entela, I'm really looking forward also how you see that in that kind of respect. So before we maybe move over very quickly, Entela, I think I was just thinking, I had a couple of discussions, and I think, to me at least, one of the real great examples where I think this could potentially even be a kind of, I don't know, I would say it's a role model, but up obviously for discussions, is Canada. I think in 2002, they had a very similar kind of, let's say, discussion what we now have in terms of joint HTA. Canada consists of various provinces and territories, and they all did their own assessments, basically, right? And suddenly we obviously, or the Canadians also suddenly saw that in some areas, provinces, territories, you saw different drugs available, right? Reimbursed for, in others not. So you had really a big kind of debate as well, if this is really what the country really wants. And what they basically as well turned it is a kind still of joint HTA, right? They had done suddenly that common drug review, which is for the country, and the pricing was then as well, or better said, the reimbursement decision could then as well be taken by the various provinces and territories. So the benefit assessment is on national level, the maximum pricing is on national level, and then the individual territories and provinces could basically either further negotiate, that's at least how I understood it, and or even decide not still to take it because of maybe a high budget impact, but ultimately that's then more as a kind of, I think, joint analysis ultimately. I think what I also thought is maybe an interesting point, that's maybe, I think politically it might be maybe a bit difficult for Europe, but I thought it's really interesting because there's also the options for opting out of the joint assessment, right? So if you, for example, see upfront that this is not where I want to go with my province, or in the European case, obviously, from the country's perspective, there's always at the beginning of an assessment the option to opt out. And I think that's also maybe something we could turn on. I think interesting. I think the whole kind of, let's say, implementation still is, I think, out for debate. So that's maybe as well another option. So very briefly to summarize, before I would really looking forward to hear what Entela is saying. I think the reimbursement list price applies nationally and is negotiated at the national level. I mean, as we said beforehand, between the pharmaceutical manufacturer, obviously, and a board which was implemented in Canada. It is then up to the individual provinces and territories to decide which new drugs should be included in the basket of the obviously as well different kind of system when we compare to some of the countries in Europe. In Canada, it's a publicly funded service. It is, one too fast. Yes, and the role of the federal government remains primarily limited to marketing authorization, which is a bit different, obviously, now to Europe. But here we could maybe just say to the benefit assessment, right? The first part for Europe, what we have just said, and then to the price regulation, which is then where, if you would think in a European term, to my kind of understanding, would be then on a different country level, but that's maybe still a kind of adaptation to the Canadian kind of model. Ultimately, before we really bring that as well up for discussion, does it work in Canada? I've just put in there a reference, which is very positive, but obviously if you speak as well to industry, to different kind of healthcare stakeholders in Canada, you get obviously always a mixed kind of opinions on that, right? Some say, yes, it perfectly works. Some are saying, yeah, it maybe works a bit better than before. Others are still disappointed. It always depends. And I think obviously it also depends a bit in, let's say, in which disease area, for example, you're also talking about, and also with which territories you might have been in discussions. But ultimately, I think that's why let's see, to whom I referred a couple of times in my very brief intro talk. Entela, I mean, as said, we have started that discussion in Barcelona some years ago. The whole kind of process has started in Europe. What is your opinion on that? I think maybe first bring us again as well on board, because you have also been working really a lot on the European level. And then let's just see how you would see as well the impact on Italy. And I'm happy, obviously, to contribute then later on as well, how I potentially see it as a kind of impact for Germany as well.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan. The discussions on this topic, it's very important. It's, I think, a sensible point now for the future pharmaceutical area. And if we look the ongoing work in progress, that, for example, the recent dealing that we have with Council and Parliament on this proposal of that the European Commission is in parallel also with the strategic plan of pharmaceutical area from the European Commission. So all these activities are in parallel, and also looking what, for example, the network of HTA in Europe is working. So starting for this discussion, what will be the impact now in the single member states? Now that it's unknown, I think, but we can assume, or we can discuss. Now we can imagine what could be the impact in terms of technical point of view, but also organizations, because that's another point to discuss. I think that it's important now just to do some context now on this proposal. So how the European Commission's launch this proposal, and the most important, the changes the proposal would bring. So the Commission argues that the ongoing cooperations, because we have a very important cooperations in European context between HTA bodies, starting with HTA network, also with the Unita from 2006 till the Joint Action 3 launch in 2016, and all the work that, by the way, this cooperations is doing currently. This ongoing cooperations has demonstrated the benefit of European cooperations in terms to establish professional network and tools, methodologies, piloting, joint assessment, but had not help remove the fragmentations of national system and duplications of the efforts. So that's the most important point that we know, and this is one of the objectives of this proposal. So building on this cooperation, the proposal would address the shortcoming of the current model and establish permanent cooperation between member states. So this is, I tried, very interesting as it's it's a way to move versus an harmonized procedures that you mentioned before, the European Medicine on Products Agency. So same approach now in a European permanent corporations. So this proposes it would focus on joint work of the clinical aspects of HTA, where European add value is considered to be highest. And we know, because we know from the recent mapping of HTA activities from different HTA bodies, these are published on the European Commission's documents, that the add value is it's fundamental in the assessment of medicinal products and also medical devices. The methodologies are different. For example, in Italy, we have a specific framework on innovations, but the add value it's used from different countries. So this is very common. Both the assessment, on the other side, both the assessment of the more context-specific non-clinical HTA domains and decision-making as regard pricing and reimbursement would remain at member states. So the example that you mentioned before with Canada, I try maybe a little bit similar, for example, in Italy with a regional perspective. So national perspective and then regional perspective. I try more similar the regulatory European pathway with this proposal of clinical joint assessment. The other point is that we have in this proposal general objectives, specific objectives, and operational objectives. So the general objectives are to ensure better functioning of the internal market, to contribute to a high level of human health protections. In the specific, it's to improve availability of innovative health technology for European patients, ensure efficient use of resources, and strengthen the quality of health technology across Europe, and improve business predictability. And this is very important for industry perspective. And regarding the operational objective, this is also another important topic, because this is linked with the promotions of convergence in health technology assessment procedures, methodologies, to reduce duplications of efforts for HTA bodies and industry, to ensure the uptake of joint outputs in member states, and also to ensure the long-term sustainability of European corporations on HTA. The proposal so contain these 4 pillars that you mentioned before, but are important to highlight because are different and also with specific definition. So the joint clinical assessment, to distinguish from the joint clinical consultations that could be for drugs, medicinal products, but also for medical devices or non-pharmaceuticals. This is the other definitions that we use in UNECA, for example. And the third pillar is the identifications of emerging health technology. And lastly, and this is also very interesting, the voluntary cooperations. Voluntary cooperations not only on clinical domain of HTA, but also on non-clinical domain. For example, pharmacoeconomic analysis. Also, we can talk maybe also during the discussions, which are the benefits and which are the implications from different perspectives, patients' perspective, member states, national authorities, HTA bodies, health technology developers or industry company. And it's quite interesting because I try positive opinion, for example, from EPFIA, so for pharmaceutical companies, but some concerns from, for example, industry that develop medical devices. Maybe, and this is another point to be discussed and to see better, because the procedures are different. And also the other implications are, we know that in the long run, the age technology assessment bodies could make cost saving, and the data from European Parliamentary Research Service, they report that this cost saving are up to 2.67 million per year of euros. So while the introductions of an European HTA system could result in a initial increase of in cost, especially, for example, in resource, in personnel, this is expected to be compensated then with work sharing arrangements, so agreements, and avoid the duplications. But this is something that, yeah, we know we can discuss for the long run, but it's something that we can also the agency or the HTA bodies has to handle now at the beginning. It is anticipated that the member states with advanced health technology systems would initially take the lead, in order also to help the other member states without HTA bodies, and a larger part of the workload, and increased capacity building in relation to HTA could be expected over time, particularly for countries with more limited resources. The overall cost of these proposals are estimated around 60 million euros, and the implications of the proposal for the European budget would mainly be related to the support of the framework sent to Secretariat that will be hosted by the Commission's. This report also on the implications of these proposals. And also other considerations that you mentioned before, which is the impact or the opinions from the national parliaments, from the Ministry of Health of single member states, from the single payers and industry perspective, and or better stakeholder perspective, because the range of the stakeholders is very huge. Currently, yeah, you mentioned that we have a deal, and we have some details, and this document that report the Parliament and Council negotiates to reach the provisional agreement on the increasing cooperations of member states on HTA report enhance coordination, transparency, wider stakeholder dialogue, and greater transparency in the joint work. And the detail, the regulations report also specific considerations on transparency between a clinical joint assessment and clinical joint consultations, because the two procedures have different details. And also, which is the next steps, because now we are waiting. The Parliament and Council are now expecting to endorse the content of this agreement, and we have, by the way, in this draft partial agreement, some specifications also on timing, also on what kind of drugs. You mentioned orphan medicinal product, and also if I'm not wrong, in Article 5 of this regulations, they report also the advanced therapy and some indications on timing for the member states, and how the European Commission can handle now these details. Yeah, regarding the legislative process, lastly, we have this legal basis that is regulated by the Article 168, that it's a public health, that is added to Article 114 proposed by the commissions. The financing I mentioned before about that European Union should ensure a stable and permanent public funding as provided in the multi-annual financial framework and the joint work and voluntary cooperations as well for the support framework. It's considered also a transitional period when the member states may delay their participations in the system until respectively 4 years for medicinal product and 7 years for devices and in vitro diagnostic medical devices after the date of the applications. So this is more or less the content of this proposal and with what is the steps and also what we are waiting now for the discussions till the discussions with the agreement between Parliament and Council regarding the impact on the single member states. I think that we have to see what the single HTA bodies report in these discussions. What currently, for example, the Unita is working now currently on this to maintain these cooperations at European level between different health technology assessment bodies, and how the single agency is involved in this cooperations. It's regarding UNETA, the leads of the agency of the UNETA is working now to have this survey in order to respond to different questions related to the scope and the objective of the future of head of agencies group of HTA bodies, in order not to have this paper and recently UNETA published the white paper on the European cooperations and how the activities that UNETA has done until now on this activity. So I don't know if you would like to go more into detail, for example, how, for example, the add value, for example, for Italy, from my perspective, how this can impact on how this proposal now can change in the future. But we will see, by the way, the situations of the transitional period and how the which is the impact, for example, from different perspectives, for example, industry or passions groups or other stakeholders that are involved in this transparent cooperations.
Wonderful. Thank you, Entela, for these big insights. Yes, we will come. We also received a lot of questions. So let's just open now the discussions, and then later we also have a questions for Italy. Now, we said we had a little surprise for you. So tonight we don't have only the experience of Italy, of Entela here, and of Stefan, who's sitting in Germany with a Mars consulting agency. No, we also have here now on the line our good friend from Spain, Max Broza, the CEO of Oblique. Good evening, Max. And then we have also Vincent Chény from France here, our good friends, and actually head here of MEDVANCE also. And then also Stefan is just now promoting Graham from our good friends from the UK, from Remap. Also, if you have there any questions. So feel free also to go into the details with the questions. Now let's just go there with the questions here, Stefan and Entela. The first question is actually, I mean, when we go there, we have all the EU member states. Will that be then not a big monster here what can we expect of agency? I mean, if we want to encourage like all the national interests, this is going to be a big agency, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think where I also see maybe a bit of the, let's call it positively the interest, how this will be handled on a on a EU level, right? But because I mean, if we take, for example, disease areas like diabetes, or also oncology, right, where we have also different let's say endpoints which are accepted across Europe, right? I mean, I think diabetes, I think we have products which are only available outside of Germany. Let's call it a bit provocative, right? Because I think Germany has we're still not accepting HbA1c as an endpoint. It's the same in oncology, right? I mean, response rate is not accepted in Germany, not as well as progression-free survival, even though that, at least what I know from top-level information, I think Lutz, we have as well done some of those analyses, that this is sometimes also accepted in other countries. We have also seen other differences in other disease areas like rheumatoid arthritis, etc. So ultimately, if I understand let's say the agreement and the proposal yet for the EU joint assessment, is that on that joint assessment, everything should be and could potentially be then finally used on a national level for the, let's say, added benefit, and then also obviously for the price negotiation would need to be submitted on a European level. Not even to forget, I have just mentioned the endpoints, but I think also we need to think about the different comparators, which could also be a difficult one, just assuming that potentially then also, I don't know, indirect comparisons would then need to be probably done across a lot of different comparators, also still on a European level. I don't know how you see that, Entela. I think this could be potentially a monster, doable, but I think maybe a monster which then need to be sliced maybe on a country level.
Yeah, you're right. As I said before, in Italy, we have this distinguished way now to assess first the add value and then to define the pricing. So it seems to me that it's quite a separate, even that currently in Italy we have long discussions and also discussion on to have a unique assessment. So this we will see the impact. What's happened in the future. It's uncertain. It's high uncertainty. By the way, if you look the current formula, we separate the definitions of the add value from the definitions of price of the price of the drug and the reimbursement. And the concerns and the critical points, and in Italy, this framework of the innovations now doesn't translate. No, we don't have this measures now to translate into the impact on pricing. So it's not a real value-based pricing. No, it's just an indications that drugs that are highly innovative, so full innovative or conditional, but mostly for the fully innovative, are included in this to separate funds, and also has automatically no access to the regional formulary. But how the price, the range, how, for example, the managed agreement or the confidential agreement are changing, in this context, this is unknown. Or better, we can do some analysis, as academia or as a part of our work, in order to capture it, to understand. But currently, and this is a strong critical point that we have in Italy. On the other hand, by the way, I tried this proposal very similar to what, for example, our technical scientific committee is doing during their assessment, in order to assess first unmet medical need, add value, and robustness of clinical trials. So that's why I mentioned before this very interesting document of European Commission's launched in 2017 on mapping of different HTA bodies. How not only how many organizations we have in each member states, but also which is the methodologies, if they are using, for example, surrogacy, are they accepting or not surrogate endpoint? Are they using comparators? What kind of comparators, and so on? Standard of care and other considerations. And this clarify from my point of view, now this huge fragmentations, by the way, on methodologies in HTA. But on the other hand, this value or this parameter or criteria that we say in Italy, the add value, it's very common. So that's why I think that in order to harmonize these systems, because we need to have a harmonized process in in access, just to stop the first 4 elements of HTA core. So without including legal, social, economic considerations, we have to talk a single language. So let's, from my point of view, I think this is very important, but we will need a lot of time now in order now to harmonize all the systems from methodologic point of view, but also from our organization's point of view.
Wonderful, thank you. Now let's go to Spain. Welcome tonight, Max.
Good evening.
Good evening. So we have also questions here. So have you noticed any that also the Spain national HTA body is anticipating in the EU regulations?
Sorry, I didn't get the question, Lutz. Sorry.
Have you noticed that national HTA bodies like the ones in Spain also anticipating actively here in that EU regulation? What's the opinion in Spain about that, the progress?
Well, I'm afraid that there's no single opinion in Spain about that. This happens quite a lot, many times. Well, the thing is that I was wondering when I was listening to Entela's presentation and the first mention to the Canadian system and how they put together the joint assessment, that is something that is already in place in Spain. I mean, we have 17 different regional health services that in fact are the true payers in Spain. I mean, we don't have a single payer, but we have 17 payers, okay? So, and so far, we haven't been successful in doing just one single clinical effectiveness joint assessment for the whole country. And there are a number of reassessments then at regional and even local level in hospitals sometimes. So, so I don't know what can I say of what can anticipate from Spain regarding the how we may adopt a potential joint assessment at European level. But I've been my whole life, my personal opinion is I've been my whole life trying to push with a joint assessment and to separate clearly the assessment from the appraisal. And this is something that in Spain has not been that clear in many instances. And it is not clear for many regional health services, and even it's not that clear at national level. So I don't know. I think that we should be ambitious, but let's do some kind of incremental work. I mean, we don't need to have that big agency that was commenting about Stefan a few minutes ago, but we could just try to start with some kind of mutual recognition, something like that, and see what's going on. But yeah, I think that harmonization from a top down in a top down manner may be difficult to achieve.
Yeah, I think good point, Max, and I agree with you, by the way, right? I'm not promoting such a big kind of institution, and I think at the end of the day, I mean, dependent how this whole kind of thing would potentially fly now in Europe, and I think you just brought it in. I think in Spain you have already as well those difficulties from a national down to local levels, where I think at least from outside you also still have, let's say, issues in some regions in terms of access for patients, right? So ultimately, this could maybe even go in the opposite direction, right? Europe and the European Union wants to have faster access for patients, but if we have even further administrative kind of monsters from European to national to regional to local level, it might even potentially take even longer, right?
Great. Yeah, that's also a good point. Now we have also Graham here on the line. Good evening to the UK. Good evening, Graham.
Good evening, Lutz. Good evening.
Yeah. Everyone. Now I mean, we just had the Brexit with you. We lost you guys. Sorry for that. But now when you look here at the joint HTA, are you happy that you have the Brexit and you don't have to join?
It's an interesting question, isn't it? Because if you look at NICE, NICE has been going for over 20 years. It's got an extremely robust process, very transparent process. Was it really going to change as a result of this new system coming in place? I mean, I think one of the benefits or one of the differences, and you touched on this, Entela, was you don't look at the cost, and NICE based its decision on cost effectiveness. So I can see that NICE, we're very good at compromises in the UK. I can see that NICE would have come up with some sort of compromise where they'll take the clinical data, still ask the manufacturer to make a submission, including the cost effectiveness data, and then make its decision based on the cost effectiveness analysis. So I personally don't think whether we were in Brexit or whether we were still part of Europe, whether it would have made much of a difference from a UK perspective, I have to say. The fact that Brexit happened and we are outside obviously means that we're not part of this, this ongoing assessment. And I think that leads to some interesting questions from a manufacturer point of view, because we've now got the MHRA, so the manufacturer can decide when to submit for regulatory approval. And it's already been communicated that NICE and the MHRA will be conducting their assessments in parallel in the future. So at the same time, so manufacturers now have the opportunity, if they wanted to, of delaying, submission to the UK, maybe to see what happens at the European level, what happens with this, European-wide assessment, and then they might be able to modify their assessment to the UK. So there are some interesting opportunities and different approaches that manufacturers will be able to take as a result of this.
Right. Now, to you all, I don't know what's your opinion from a practical angle? Do you think that the French HAS or the IQWiC or the Italian authorities or Spain local authorities actually, well, we have that building, right? The 17 states will they still have a function in the future, the same roles and responsibilities, or is it actually that we have, like in the future, one single HTA body for the euro? What's your thoughts about that? So probably each of you one sentence about that. I give you 1.5 sentences. So Stefan, you want to start?
Yeah. For sure, thank you, Lutz. I mean, let's put it that way, I think they would probably still use the same methodology, right? I think that's for sure. I think it's probably more still the question in which way it would really go into the kind of full process, and what would really be taken from a European level. That's already a bit more than 1.5 sentences. So I would say generally I would not expect a lot of changes. I think, Graham, you just pointed out what would have potentially changed in case NICE and you as UK would still be in the European Union. I think ultimately, in terms of practical work, it will probably not change so much. I guess it's probably more from a process perspective, and then finally from a decision perspective, I think that might probably change a lot more, at least from a German perspective, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree also for Italy. I don't think that that big changes now in terms of practical point of view. But by the way, as I said before, we are in this days now an analysis for Ministry of Health regarding the new members of IFA Commission. So I don't think that this is linked with the reorganizations linked with this proposal. By the way, it's linked with the reorganizations of the agency in general. In any case, as the Max said in Spain, also in Italy, we don't have these discussions on this European Commission's proposal. So it's we don't have open discussions, even at regional HTA bodies, because as Spain, also in Italy, we have HTA at regional level. And also we have IFA, it's responsible for pharmaceuticals, but also we have Agenas, or we have a regional as Emilia-Romagna, Veneto, or for example, my university, Cattolica and Gemelli are also are involved in the assessment of health technologies. So no trace from my perspective, no, in terms of discussions on what is the future, no, of the health technology assessment. By the way, is needed because some discussions are ongoing in terms to define, no, at national level, how now to improve in terms of procedures, assessment, to have also same considerations for pharmaceuticals and medical device. On the other hand, by the way, there are some changes, for example, in a positive way, I can say, from IFA IC in terms of transparency, because this proposal is linked with high transparency, and we need to have more transparency. And the launch of this guidelines of price reimbursement negotiation criteria. Also, for example, regarding COVID-19, the centralizations of the approval of COVID-19 clinical studies. And this is something also very, very interesting. And this could be linked also in terms of to apply more transparency in regulatory and why not HTA perspective. But on the other hand, for example, for HTA reports, we have very, very few public reports. So that's could need absolutely an important effort from the agency, people to resources, in order to publish what they are doing internally. So yeah, that's more or less in terms of organization structure of the HTA in Italy. It's, by the way, a big uncertainty.
Yeah, great. Now let's switch from Italy to France. So bonsoir tonight, our good friend Vincent from Paris.
Bonsoir.
Bonsoir, Vincent. So what's your opinion? What's about the HAS? Will it still survive?
That's interesting. I think so, because in any case, any established organization is always finding a way to a reason for existing. So I suspect they will remain. But let's go back to the position of France in this whole area. Right from the beginning, France has been involved and was among the founders of Unita, is vice president of Unita since 2018. And its positioning is more that kind of promoting best practices among the members. And as you know, now it's pretty common, for instance, to have early dialogue with HTA body across Europe. And this has been strongly pushed by France and so the HAS. So that's good in a way, because it's similar approach and it's kind of promoting best approaches across the countries. On let's say less positive level is still per HTA body that you have to do early dialogue. So I suspect that's the willingness here is to try to find best approaches, but still keep ability locally to end up with the best and most suitable evaluation for the country. It's related probably to some political considerations, like healthcare being such a sensitive topic, and even more these days on the political side, having control is seen probably at the utmost importance. Still, there are some good signals, and one coming very recently, because it has been announced yesterday, and I just read the information we just received, that the HAS has reorganized itself. And it's interesting to see that among the many changes, there are some direction. I don't want to go into details because it's always fairly complex, the administrative structure in France, as you know, but at least they have organized a few services to evaluate now separately, let's say, drugs from medical devices, for instance. But also they have highlighted an entity called International Mission, which purpose is clearly to get ready to implement the new European, let's say, evaluation processes. So that's very encouraging in a way. So HTS itself is reorganizing to get ready probably to implement it properly. What is of our interest is why do they also reorganize? And I think this is also a source of hope in the fact that this organization will take place and will be applied, because they feel the need to, first of all, to, let's say, grant earlier access to highly innovative initiative, which is not the case today. There is a gap in terms of speed to market for innovation, and this is felt by HTS. Also, they are, as always, interested in optimizing the regulatory delays, which will go into the direction of having a more integrated European process. And also, say they want to, let's say, promote a more European methodology of evaluation. So those are positive, because those are the purpose of this organization, which is a big thing for the HTS. And they seem to be very consistent with European HTA. So I think we'll move the right direction. Will it replace the existing structure? Probably not. But we can expect that in the near future, we'll have much more similarities and differences across the HTA body in Europe.
Yes, and when we look to Spain, Max, do I get it right? Your local authorities, they will survive. They will not give up any power, right?
Not at all. I mean, pricing and reimbursement is done at national level. There's an effort to do some kind of joint placing therapy or positioning report at national level, and that has produced no change at all in regional HTA bodies and everything. So I suspect that the response is no, nothing will happen, at least at short term. Sure.
Okay, great. Now, our audience is asking, when do we expect that this goes live? When can we have the first results of that group? What's your opinion on that? I mean, that's also the question how this could be handled. I mean, with a lot of geographies, a lot of national guidelines, and therefore lots of different appropriate comparator therapies or endpoints or so on. So what's the time frame we can expect here? The first really hard results. Any guess?
I guess Entela, I think Entela, I think you might have the best guess for those kind of timelines. I think I have in mind in 3 years' time, I think oncology will first kick in. And then I guess the kind of question is how fast would the assessment really be done on European level? Because I think that's maybe also still the big question, let's say for the GBA, right? Because we have access to products whenever the dossier is submitted. So this will as well be an interesting question.
I'm in mood. Yeah, as we refer on this document of the proposal of the regulations, this partial mandate for negotiations with the European Parliament, because this document in the separate distinguished article now report this details on, as you mentioned before, the cancer area and timing on clinical joint assessment. So we are specifically talking about clinical joint assessment because the regulations include also the other 3 pillars. But for this clinical joint assessment, the chapters and the separate articles on this on timing, I'm trying to have this information in terms of which are the timing. Yeah, I'm in. So regarding this is the Article 5 of the Sections 1 of this joint work on health technology assessment, and the dates regarding pharmaceuticals to be set is the for medicinal product with new active substance in which therapeutic indication is the treatment of cancer. 3 years after the date of the applications of these regulations, the Commission is empowered to adopt an implementing act that sets out the date as from which the obligations to prepare joint clinical assessment shall apply the medicinal products which are designed as orphan medicinal products, pursuant to regulations on orphans, and medicinal products which are regulated as advanced therapy medicine products. The other considerations is that 5 years after the date of applications of these regulations, the Commission is empowered to adopt an Implementations Act that sets out the date as from which the obligation to prepare joint clinical assessment shall apply for drugs for which the therapeutic indication is the treatment of any of the disease referred in the annex of these regulations. And the last one, always on pharmaceuticals and joint clinical assessment, 8 years after the date of applications of these regulations for all medicinal products referred to this paragraph 1 that it's linked with the clinical joint assessment. So other considerations also in terms of timing and also of criteria. This regulations report in the detail on the criteria of medical device. So the assessment is based on unmet medical need, first in class, potential impact on patients or public health of healthcare systems, and also incorporating software using artificial intelligence, machine learning, and algorithm, and so on. So these are, I think, are interesting in terms of how to set this joint clinical assessment, but in the detail or in practically, we will see how the launch of this process, thanks of the cooperations between member states with the coordination group, that can carry out a joint clinical assessment and can work in an annual work program. And we will see how this coordination group initiate this assessment on health technologies, designating subgroup on joint clinical assessment, and in order to conduct this assessment on behalf of coordination group. So I suggest, by the way, colleagues that are asking, for example, also details on therapeutic areas or characteristics on, for example, how this assessment is composed. You can try this in this document, for example, in terms of patients populations, interventions, or comparators, or health outcomes, and so on. So the articles are also, some of these articles are what the questions here are reporting in terms of which are the right comparators, have the single member states or the national authority to replace or to not to replace, but to repeat that assessment, because, for example, the scientific guidance are different in that specific area or the comparator. This we know that it's the strong discussions that we have at the beginning, but I think that the concept should be a little bit pragmatic or practical, So we have to start with harmonizations, with this group of coordinations, and this document details how, and also I mentioned before Unita, see, if you would like, I suggest to look this white paper, because there are a lot of considerations, how to work in the future, how to cooperate better, and how the Unita or this head of groups of agencies in a HTA context can change this kind of cooperations. From a technical point of view, I'm a pharmacologist and I work also with HTA assessment. I know that it's very difficult to adapt system, an old system versus a new system, but a lot of work is done. And Unita, by the way, thanks of clinical joint assessment, the early dialogue, but especially because we don't touch tonight this, but especially with the post-launch evidence generations, that the start of working in Unita, but we have to continue in cooperation, because data and the real world data, it's very important, I can say fundamental for some specific areas, special orphan conditions, rare conditions, orphan drugs. And there is a lot of European cooperations, a lot of European work that we have done till now. One of this, for example, I mentioned Unita because Unita is the network of the European network of HTA, but also different European projects, for example, Impact HTA, or other networks that are working also on this in order to harmonize, for example, parameters or methodologies on HTA. So the situation, I think I'm optimistic in that sense, and as a pharmacologist and as assessor now, I think that this can help in order to have that first objective of this proposal, avoid duplications and avoid fragmentations.
Yeah. And we also have a question here from the Czech Republic. So also welcome here to our small European countries here, to the audience from there. So what's the national implications of the Czech Republic? And is there some inclusion of local HTA body, Sukl? I hope I pronounced that right. Yes, of course, there are they are like all invited there in that approach. The question is, do they want to participate? How much power they have? And what actually, I think, and dear co-host with me, do you agree that I think the small European countries, they will like have the most benefit out of that, right? Because they don't have the power to assess all these drugs like Germany. I mean, Germany, we have the Federal Joint Committee, a big body, right? Who have also the organizational power to run all these HTA assessments. But the small ones, I mean, that's a lot of organizing, right?
Yeah, that's at least what I have also heard from different other Eastern European stakeholders as well. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you all. It's already a little bit over time. So we just said we want to do an hour, but already running up to 70 minutes. So you ask all, how's about the video? Check out our website, www.medvance.eu here for our video. And there also check out what's the next topic up. We put that here in quite a few days. So you want to go on our website and check that out for our next MEDVANCE webinar. Now, before we come to the end, once again here, Professor Walzer, our Market Access podcast, where we also have covered some European aspects. But let me thank you tonight, our speakers, Dr. Stefan Walzer. Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you, Lutz. Thank you, everybody.
And also to Italy. Thank you, Entela. That was really great insights here.
Thank you.
Good night to Rome.
Thank you.
And then to the UK, thank you, Graham, for joining us here. Even it's not longer the EU, we still miss you. And to Spain, thank you, Max. And also to Paris, good night, bonne nuit, good night and good luck. And now, if you liked all these webinars, check out our website, www.medvance.eu. Or also go on our local website, which is the Market Access and Pricing Strategy.de, where we have like more also topics with European and also German or Austrian topics related there. And you see here also our webinar calendar. Okay, have a good night. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night all.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night. Bye-bye.